If you're a homeschooler, does any of the following: highlighting, rereading textbooks, listening to lectures, writing notes by copying verbatim, then they are learning at a slow pace. If you test their understanding, you might find it lacking. And that's because effective learning methods take a level of concentration and cognitive strain. So in this video, I'll be talking about learning methods that will take your homeschooler's learning ability to another level. There were times in my life where I stumbled upon these effective learning methods, and they brought me a level of success that I didn't achieve when I was using those lesser type studying methods that I mentioned previously. But it wasn't until I read this book, Ultralearning by Scott Young, where I learned just how important these study methods were and like so much more information. So in this video, I'll be going through 4 principles, ultralearning principles from this book that will have the biggest impact on your homeschooler. I will be going through examples from the book and also personal examples that I experienced, as well as tips and strategies on how to apply these ultralearning principles in your homeschool. As a homeschooling parent, you have the opportunity to instill something great in your children, and that is how to be self-taught, self-motivated, courageous, ambitious individuals that love to learn. So let's get started. But first, what is ultralearning? Ultralearning is the strategy for acquiring skills and knowledge that is both self-directed and intense. I think the best way to convey what this is by providing examples. So the author of this book, Scott Young, he undertook he wanted to complete a 4-year computer science degree in 1 year, and he used MIT's courses that were uploaded for free and assignments and final exams to do this. And he also embarked on this journey to travel to 4 different countries in 1 year and learning their respective languages. And those countries were Brazil, Spain, China, and Korea. And a friend of Scott Young, Tristan de Montebello, he undertook an ultralearning project to improve his public speaking, which he wasn't very good at to begin with. So he, through his ultralearning progress, in the 7 months that he did this, at the end, he competed in the World Championship of Public Speaking and was ranked in the top 10. It's more than just discipline. It's about the methods that they use to undertake these challenges. And that's what Scott Young describes in this book. But ultralearning doesn't need to be these big challenges. Here are some example ultralearning projects that your homeschooler can undertake: studying for the SATs, learning a language before traveling, improving their writing for college entrance essays, and learning or improving a hobby or skill that they have in a short time frame, such as 6 months. So the first principle I'm going to talk about is called meta-learning, and it's actually the first principle talked about in this book. And meta-learning means learning how to learn. And in this step, you are creating a map of your ultralearning project. You write down the end goal that you want, the list of things that you're going to learn, and the resources that you are going to use. You may have your child just jump into learning with whatever material that you have, but with the meta-learning map, you are intentionally choosing like exactly what to learn and how it benefits you and the specific resources that you're going to use, because with ultralearning, you don't really like blindly follow a curriculum, but you choose and pick which part of the curriculum that you are using and supplement with other resources. So I think the best way to show what the meta-learning step might look like in an ultralearning project is to give an example. So in this example, there is a student, a high school student, that is planning to apply to university, and he's thinking of computer science as a major. And so he wants to create this ultralearning project that will span 7 months before he has to apply to university. So his ultralearning project is to create something with Python, like an app or some sort of program. And the author suggests 3 questions that you should answer in this meta-learning step: why, what, and how. The why is important because if you know exactly why you want to learn a skill or a subject, you can save a lot of time by focusing your project on exactly what matters to you. Now, I've already touched on this, and the why for this student particular ultralearning project is that he wants to see if studying computer science at university is something that he wants to do. The next question you should answer in your meta-learning step is the what. The what refers to the knowledge and abilities you'll need to acquire in order to be successful. Breaking things down into concepts, facts, and procedures can enable you to map out what obstacles you'll face and how to best overcome them. So I've written down here the concepts and facts and procedures in this Learning Python Ultralearning project. So concepts is anything that needs to be understood. So these are programming fundamentals, variables, control flow. And facts is anything that needs to be memorized. Thankfully, programming programming is not something that you need to memorize a lot of things. So it's basically like the syntax of the writing, basic data types, operators, and Boolean logic. And then procedures is anything that needs to be practiced. And there's a lot of things that you need to practice when you're doing programming. I should mention that I studied, like, computer science was one of my majors at university. I picked this as an example because I'm most familiar with it. Anyway, so procedures is anything that needs to be practiced. So breaking problems into steps, using conditionals and loops, writing and using functions. The last question that you need to answer in your meta learning step is the how. The how refers to the resources, environment, and methods you'll use when learning. So here I just listed 2 free interactive courses on Python that this fictional student can do to learn Python and eventually work on his project. And the final project ideas that I came up with for the student is he could make a game, he could make a flashcard or quiz program, he could make a budget or expense tracker. Meta learning is important because it is preparation. You are giving your child the systematic approach of how to learn something and how to find the resources that you need to use and how to break a big project into its smaller components. The next principle I'm going to be talking about is principle 3 from the book, and that is directness. This principle refers to the fact that you learn best by actually doing the thing that you want to learn. If you want to learn the language, speak it. If you want to master taking video games, then make them. If you want to pass a test, practice solving the kinds of problems that are likely to appear on it, as the author did on his own MIT challenge. A lot of people do not do this. They learn by memorizing vocab lists instead of speaking, or doing, Duolingo instead of actually speaking the language. They memorize math formulas without solving unfamiliar problems. From the age of 12 onwards, I was essentially homeschooling myself. And when I was 15, I started preparing for the SATs. And it was during this SAT preparation that I unknowingly used this directness principle. Although I was limited in the amount of resources I had, I was still able to apply this directness approach in my SAT preparation. I only used free and cheap materials. I used Khan Academy's free SAT preparation. I used 2 old outdated SAT preparation textbooks that I found secondhand. And I also found free SAT practice tests online. I had no tutor. I took no online courses. I prepared for this test entirely on my own, aside from asking my dad to review the essay portion of the SAT practice tests. The best way for me to pass the SATs was to become over-familiar with the test, to know the type of questions that were going to be asked on the test, and to give myself the time constraints that exist when you do the SATs to best mimic the environment. I scored at 1290. A perfect score is 1600, and the average SAT score in 2017, which is when I took the test, was 1083. So I scored above average. This is the best example of applying directness in your learning. I learned how to take the SAT test by doing SAT practice tests, by doing SAT questions. And that's all I did, basically, to prepare for this test. An example from the book would be Weitzel. He was a newly graduated architect student, and he was applying to entry-level jobs during the market crash of 2008. And he had a lot of trouble doing this because these firms didn't want to hire someone new and spend the money to train on them. Weitzel took it upon himself to figure out what kind of skills architects actually use. And he got a job at a blueprint printing company to understand the blueprint paper that architecture firms were using. And he also learned about the specific software that architecture firms use to develop their plans. And he taught himself how to use that program. He was applying this principle of directness by actually learning what these companies want from their employees, because at architect school, they mostly taught design and theory. By the end of his Ultralearning project, he developed a 3-story building in his portfolio and bought it just to 2 companies, and he got offers from both. Here are some examples of how indirect learning might happen in a homeschool environment. Indirect learning for a SAT preparation Ultralearning project might look like watching SAT strategy videos, reading prep books, practicing without time constraints. And indirect learning, which is what you want your student to do, is by taking full SAT practice tests, simulating actual test conditions, and constantly reviewing mistakes. I really wanted to learn chemistry in high school like they did in the movies, but I did indirect learning. That looked like reading about chemical reactions, only watching lab demonstrations, memorizing procedures without actually doing them. The direct learning I wanted to do would have looked like performing hands-on labs, observing real outcomes in real time. So the next principle I want to talk about is Principle 5 in the book. Principle 5, yes, and it's called retrieval. Retrieval is the practice of recalling information without looking it up on the internet or looking through a textbook. This practice is usually used during tests where you don't have access to a textbook, but it's also used in the scenario of a job interview. The interviewer is asking you questions regarding your knowledge of the skill that's required on the job or the knowledge that's required on the job. And you can't look up, the answers. Retrieval can be seen in different areas of life. Here's an example from the book of an extreme case of retrieval practice. So Judith Polgar is the best female chess player in the world, and she is a result from her father's project of raising genius children. She had two other sisters who were also they're still alive, who are also chess grandmasters. Their father, would have them play chess blindfolded. By practicing without looking at the board, it forced them to cultivate the ability to follow positions in their head, which was useful not only for retaining key chess patterns long-term, but also honing the ability to simulate moves on the board that an opponent might play. You might be thinking that the Polgar sisters did not have a happy childhood, but their father placed an importance on fun when they're learning. So learning chess in a fun way without punishment and without forcing them to learn. They excel at chess because they wanted to and they love the challenge for it. Their father said, one of the most important educational tasks is to teach self-education. The three sisters outpaced their father's ability in chess, and their father provided them with all the resources for them to want to get better at chess. So textbooks, having access to tutors, buying different chess diagrams that they can study. But it was the sisters' abilities to implement learning techniques and self-discipline that would eventually make them geniuses in chess at a very young age. Here are things that you can do with your homeschooler to practice retrieval practice. So here are a list of strategies the author wrote on things you can do to do retrieval practice. The first one is flashcards. Kind of obvious, but you can use index cards to make flashcards, or you can use this website where you can make digital flashcards called Quizlet. The second one is free recall. So after reading a book or a chapter or listening to a lecture, close it and on a blank piece of paper, have your child write down everything they can remember from reading or listening. The next one is question answer. So the author says instead of writing notes directly with the textbook open, have the textbook open and write questions as notes. For example, after reading the reasons for World War II, write a question in a notebook such as, what are the reasons for World War II? At a different time, go through those questions with the textbook closed. And obviously, if your homeschooler doesn't remember, he can go back and check the answers in the textbook. This last strategy follows along the lines of Albert Einstein's quote, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't really understand it yourself. So the final strategy for retrieval practice is to be the teacher. Young actually references the Feynman technique, named after the physicist Richard Feynman, which is where you practice explaining something as if you were teaching it to somebody else. Young had a method to do this while he was completing his MIT challenge. He would write down the concept or problem he was trying to understand at the top of a piece of paper, and in the space below, he would explain it as if he were teaching it to someone. So you can have your homeschooler do this. You can also have them practice explaining a concept to a younger sibling. So I recommend trying any of these retrieval practices with your homeschooler. So this final principle is the feedback principle. Immediate feedback on one's performance is an essential ingredient in reaching expert levels of performance. No feedback and the result is often stagnation. Long periods of time when you continue to use a skill but don't get any better at it. Sometimes the lack of feedback can even result in declining abilities. So in the book, feedback is shown as one of the most consistent strategies that ultralearners use. Famous stand-up comedians like Chris Rock would go to smaller venues to get feedback on his jokes before going to his large comedy shows. Another example is Tristan de Montebello, which was the example I gave earlier, and he would constantly be wanting feedback on his speeches. He would give speeches several times a week. He kept requesting feedback from all sorts of people, from Hollywood directors to 7th graders. The book describes 3 different types of feedback. that you can give: outcome, informational, and corrective feedback. So outcome is the most common type of feedback, and it essentially tells you if you got something right or wrong. A homeschooling mom admitted that she didn't grade her children's math worksheets. Why? Because maybe she was too busy or it wasn't as important. But then she noticed that when she was teaching these newer math concepts, that their children were lagging behind. Grading the math worksheets is a feedback to her and her kids whether they understood the material or not. The second type of feedback is informational feedback. And this is the type of feedback you can give to your students to let them know they are on the right track, or just plain wrong, and you give them the chance to figure out what went wrong. So the book explains informational feedback tells you what you're doing wrong, but it doesn't necessarily tell you how to fix it. The way you can apply this to your homeschool is by giving your child hints or comparing a problem to similar problems. And this can help your child have the opportunity to figure out the solution themselves. By giving this type of feedback, you are, developing an independent learner in your homeschooler. The last type of feedback, and the most important, is corrective feedback. Corrective feedback shows you not only what you're doing wrong, but how to fix it. This type of feedback, the author says, usually comes from a coach, a mentor, or a teacher, because it is these types of people that can pinpoint exactly what you're doing wrong and how to fix it. Some examples of corrective feedback you can provide for your child is to have more practice in a math area that your child is weak in, rewriting sentences together, explaining the strategies and techniques of how to solve something. Here's some other examples of corrective feedback, outside of school. So a coach can look at your form during a gymnastics routine and pinpoint, wrong moves. So even at a young age, you can have your child understand the importance of feedback and how they can use feedback to improve. Here's a very important thing about feedback. So feedback works well when it provides useful information that can guide future learning. If feedback tells you what you're doing wrong and how to fix it, it can be a potent tool. But feedback often backfires when it is aimed at a person's ego. So telling your child, "You're so smart," or "You're lazy," is not good feedback. And getting frustrated at your child because they're not getting the right answer or they're not understanding is not good feedback either. And it is a type of feedback that, stresses and worries your child out. So this book really resonated with me, and not like in a personal level on how I can improve myself. Obviously it did that, but it also made me think of how I want to, teach my children. I'm not saying that all learning needs to be intense like this. A big part of learning is learning for fun, learning without having to provide any output, but because your child is simply curious. So please don't take that away from your homeschool. I'm not exactly sure how you can apply Ultralearning to young children, but I think for older children in high school, they can definitely do these Ultralearning projects. And I think the best way that, to have your child pursue something like this is to have their interests lead them into picking out their Ultralearning project. If you have any tips or, other learning method strategies, I would love to hear them. But besides that, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.